Is it my turn to intro?
Intro away.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Remind podcast. Hey Dave, how are you today?
Very good, Ash. Very good. Very happy to be here off the back of last week's big topic. That was awesome. Happy to continue on.
Massive. So if you're new and you have no idea what last week's topic even was, we spoke about fear of rejection and we went deep. We talked about like spiritual stuff. We talked about, oh my gosh, childhood traumas and all kinds of things. So where we left that was feeding into perfectionism. How are you feeling about discussing this topic today?
Love it.
Yeah.
Long time listener, first time caller, all about perfectionism. And I love how this sort of ties in because it's sort of like when we go back to some of the first episodes, it's about, the sense of self and the sense of self-worth and then people pleasing, which is sort of something that comes out when that's not healed. And then you sort of look at, fear of rejection. Now, it's not about getting away from rejection, but it's about you fear the rejection so much it really distorts your decision making.
Yeah.
But perfectionism is kind of one of those things that you adapt so that you don't. So it actually helps you with your fear of perfection or your fear of
Oh,
rejection.
absolutely. Yeah.
And
It
I love
perpetuates.
how these. So like the fear of rejection is that sort of fear, but the perfection is like the actions that go behind it. They're sort of like, I will only ever show up at 100%. Now, authentically, I will always agree. Show up 100% authentically. But you don't need to show up 100% always paying the bills. You don't have to show up 100% always being the person that's giving. You don't have to always be the best at something or only do something so long as you're going to be the best at it.
Yeah.
And oh, yes. So I love this one because I have a lot of examples in the past of where I would play it small or only go hard knowing that I'm going to be pretty damn good at it as opposed to just giving it a go. So it's all wrapped up in there. So, bring it on,
Yeah.
Ash. Bring it on.
So deep, isn't it?
Let's do it.
Perfectionism for me, I remember I was seeing a psychologist once who did schema therapy. And one of the schemas that came up for me was unrelenting standards. And unrelenting standards really is perfectionism what is it? What's the saying? In a nutshell?
Yep. Yep.
I
Absolutely.
nearly said nutcase. Yeah,
I
kind of
mean,
a nut. Let's go with both. But so it showed
love it.
up in my life as like having really high standards for myself that I could never ever hold anyone else to the same standards as what I would hold myself to. And so I was really critical of myself and like I could make just the most simple, basic, innocent mistake and the profanity and abuse that I would hurl at myself in self-criticism was like disgusting. Actually, I would never speak to another human being like that, like the way that I had spoken to myself if I made a mistake or if I wasn't perfect. And so that high standards, but also tied into being really, really self critical and
Ooh.
striving for flawless performance. So now I want to be, I'm interested that perfectionism has both been to my detriment. It's caused so much anxiety. It's ruined relationships and friendships. It's made me feel anxious in my work environments. It's sabotaged my personal goals, because if I wasn't doing perfect, then I felt like a huge failure. It was like an all or nothing thing. But it's also been really helpful in some ways. Like, it's
Okay.
given me a flawless attention to detail with things.
Hmm.
I have an attention to detail on things that other people, like a lot of other people, just don't have. Um, it's really helped me in, and like, so say for example, there are certain tasks in my research career, that perfectionist trait and that flawless attention to detail made me relentlessly accurate and really, really good at my job when it came to data analysis and data, working with data in that
Mm.
scientific sense. So sometimes these things can have a trade off.
Yeah,
And then,
I guess what you're sort of saying is if you had the she'll be right attitude, then you're sort of like, the take the she'll be right attitude and sort of amplify it, and it's, we end up in half-assedville, right?
yeah,
Um,
totally.
but one question I will ask you is you were saying before about being sort of incredibly self-critical and setting
Mm.
yourself to a high standard. Were you, if you saw that in other people, did you have the same criticism of those people as well, or was it just on
As in, if
yourself?
they made the mistake that I had made?
If you'd put
No,
them in yours, okay,
no way. This is what I'm saying. The things that, the thoughts that I would have about myself, or the self talk that I would have, was alarming, because I would never speak to another human like that. And yet
which
my
is
self talk was like that.
which is really interesting because it sort of shows that you are able to show compassion in a situation and understanding when it
Hmm.
came to putting someone
For
else in
others,
that
for
for
others,
others,
not
but not
myself.
but not for yourself, which I find is really really quite incredible.
Well, it
Because I
ties
do it
back into disconnection to self. I couldn't
100%.
have compassion for self because I was completely disconnected from self. So
Because you
it's
can only
huge.
find your worth in making sure you're getting 100 out of 100. Your
Exactly.
self-worth
I
was
needed,
based on that external,
yes,
that result,
abs,
that achievement,
100%.
as opposed to the
Yes.
internal piece.
Yeah, 100%. And so one of the other points, I know I spoke how perfectionism actually served me in a positive way in some aspects of my life. There was even a trade-off for that as well, because what it meant is that I would spend an excessive amount of time and energy trying to achieve that perfection when, like, let's say 98% of my time and energy went into the last 2% to make it perfect. Whereas
Mm,
if 2% of my time and energy was enough to get a task to 98%,
mm,
I could not stop it. I couldn't go, oh, well, it's at 98. That's good enough. And it's only cost me 2% of my time and energy and effort. Now I'm going to invest 98% more time and effort and energy for that 2% yield to reach
mm.
perfection. It's
That's
crazy.
huge. That's
Huge.
huge. And I guess there are some great things to, to being that detail orientated, because you get good results. I mean, you're sort of showing characteristics of being driven and, detail focused and all of those type of things when you need to be, which
Yeah.
is a great side of it. But the shadow side of perfectionism is, in my mind, when I've experienced it in myself, is it's sort of like when I'm doing something, I look at it as though it's still not enough. Now,
Yeah.
I will look at it and sort of say it's still not enough because, and I'll take two sides of this. The light side of that is I know I can do better. I'm going to push myself. And this is not a bad thing. This is about drive. This is about pride. These are the
Mm-hmm.
things that I sort of, okay, or when I catch myself wanting to half-ass it, right? But
Yeah.
then the shadow side of it is, okay, I'm looking at it. people aren't going to like it. I have to keep on redoing it and redoing it and redoing it and redoing it and redoing it. Not because I don't think well, I feel as though it's not good enough, even though it is a starting point, right? And especially when I've started something new, because I love being creative and starting something new. How do I know? Like, and I suppose this ties into fear of rejection or fear of someone saying this is crap or
Yep.
unrealistic expectations compared to other people. Like some of the first videos I ever did, boy, did I spend some time on those. And
Yeah.
it was getting the advice of my wife at the time to sort of say, just put it out there. It doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
This is your
How
first one.
awesome is that? So your perfectionism became your safety blanket that allowed you to procrastinate and justify the procrastination from putting it out there, because once you put it out there, you were open for criticism, and the criticism felt really unsafe. And so if you
And
just go, oh no, I'm trying to make it perfect, it's a very valid and, in some ways, praiseworthy thing to do when you put something out and it's perfect. But actually it's completely maladaptive and you've just used it to justify your procrastination in the first place. I
absolutely.
love your ex-wife.
She's a wonderful person. A wonderful person. And
Yeah.
so, and then what I found, even when I rewatched it, and this is a thing where I got caught into a loop, and I'll sort of focus on this. I could see every imperfection in the video, and I'd watched it that many times because I'm editing it. If you've ever edited a video before, and you're going over and over and over and over and over and over, and then because you got this perfectionist mindset, it needs to be better, it needs to be better. Yes, it did get better the more I worked on it. That is absolutely one thing that sort of happened. But instead of just being encouraged and excited and, learning and putting in the hard work, it was coming from, I couldn't stop. I'd get to a point where I'm like, okay, it's done. And then sleep on it. No. But what if?
Yeah.
But what if? Oh,
Desperation.
that thing needs to get changed. That thing needs to get changed. And then you keep on going and going and going and going. And even since then, when I send out videos, a lot of the time when I do it for corporate clients, I look at them and go, what if it's not good enough? And I've never had
Yeah.
someone criticize. I've had feedback, would like to add this and would like to change that. Yeah, no problem. But no one's sort of saying you've completely missed the mark. You've missed the scope. It's not good enough. And there's still some artifacts there with me about that. And I must say, it's okay to feel that sense of pride and to also look at something and sort of say, can I do this better? But when it holds you in this continual procrastination,
It's like
when
you're
it
in a prison
stops,
cell.
that's right. Like
Yeah.
I can't give it to them because, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's kind of incredible. So Ash, when you are coming across people with perfectionism tendencies, how do you kind of see them? How do you sort of see that play out in either relationships or their career? And let's more talk about the things, more the shadow side as opposed to the,
Yep.
what do you generally see?
Oh my gosh, it's such a good question. So, first of all, the high standards and being overly self critical, um, striving for flawless performance. If they're being really unproductive,
Mm,
because there's that trade off between excessive amounts of time and energy to achieve just that extra 1 or 2%. And there are some jobs where that's necessary, but the chances of you having one of them is pretty slim. So most jobs and most things that we do in our life is not going to be a life or death situation if there's 1 to 2%. And generally that's where we'll get to without the perfectionism. They will often avoid doing things because of that, again, the fear of failure or a fear of making mistakes. They will often report things like that their work or effort isn't good enough.
mm,
Oh, I know a really big one.
Okay.
Really struggling to delegate tasks or letting anyone else do anything because of an underlying belief system. If I want something done well, I have to do it myself. That's a really big one.
Ooh. Okay.
Um,
And how would that manifest in a relationship?
oh, so they would perpetuate the same cycle. So, for example, maybe not asking for help.
Mm.
Um, okay, let's use classic that I see in relationships is the dishwasher. Where the perfectionist
They need to put that as a reason for divorce. Dishwasher. Yeah. Needs to be an
where
option.
the one person who may tend to have the perfectionist traits or perfectionist qualities wants a task done a certain way. And so they will always do it if the other, but then they'll complain that the other person's not helping them and that they feel like that they're unsupported. But then when the other person does it, it's not done to the standard that they want it. So then it perpetuates the cycle. Mothers with children will often do this as well. And so, well, not just mothers, parents and children will often do this as well. And so it's
We're an
something that
inclusive channel.
it's, it's, it's something that I'm really conscious of because like our kids are 6 and 9 and we're really encouraging them to take on more responsibility around the
Mm.
house and do more housework and allocating them some jobs and things like that. And it's like they're learning how to vacuum floors. They're learning how to pick up all the dog poo and make sure they don't miss any bits. They're learning how to do all these things. And when they're learning, there's grace. There's got to be an element of teaching them. There's got to be an expectation that when they're learning for the first time, just like when they were learning to walk, they're going to fall over and then they're going to keep trying and
Mm.
then they'll fall over again. They'll keep trying and they'll fall over again. And so at some point in our lives, we learned that it's not safe to fall over because we don't get
Mm.
praise and we don't get validated when we fall over. We get praise and validated when we get it right. And so when we learn
Right.
that we have to do it right in order to be worthy of praise or validation, that's where it becomes maladaptive. So yeah,
Mm.
there's lots of things. Like we could go down some rabbit holes there.
So
But
really, I think.
one more thing I'm
Oh,
just going to
you go.
add, sorry,
Sure.
is
You're right.
the final icing on the cake is difficulty in celebrating your successes or achievements or accomplishments because you always see how it could have been done better. That there's
Mm.
always room for improvement. Instead of being really joyful and happy and proud of what we've accomplished and celebrating the effort that went into it and being really proud of what we've achieved, being critical or not even, it doesn't even have to be a criticism, but actually not being able to experience the fullness of that pride and celebration because there was still room for improvement and it could have been better.
Wow. Yeah. So as you were talking about all of that, that's why I got really excited and I wanted to jump in. It's almost like perfectionism, and I may have said this before, is devoid of compassion, either for
Mm-hmm.
yourself or for what's sort of going on.
Yeah.
There is more focus on getting the job done right than experiencing the journey of the job,
Mm-hmm.
essentially.
Yeah.
And when you mentioned the dishwasher, I thought that was quite funny, but then you sort of mentioned that someone else is doing the washing up. And then I relate to myself and I look at someone doing something and especially washing up. Like with some people that I see wash up and they sort of do it in a fairly, like they get it done, right? But it's a little bit wet when they put it away, or there's
Mm-hmm.
still like a little bit of something on the plate. For some reason, it's sort of like, why would you? I can remember back a previous version of me would get reasonably triggered by it because sort
Yeah,
of like,
massively.
why can't you do it properly?
Yeah.
Well, what is it that it means that that little speck can't be there? And so from that point, it would get me really upset, and then the judgment would come in. And then from that, I don't like feeling this way about this person, or maybe I don't like feeling for myself who I am in this situation. So step aside, I'll do it myself.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I can absolutely relate to that, because there was definitely something where instead of just enjoying the fact that I'm spending time with someone washing up, I'm more focused on the outcome.
Yeah.
And I
It
think to
takes you
me,
away from the present moment.
and for me, I found it very difficult, and maybe this is where we'll start to sort of slide into where did I sort of find my perfectionism as a problem, as opposed to, because I would always justify my perfectionism. I could justify it every day of the week. It's sort of like, do you want me to be really good at something and really driven and do these things, or do you want me to just be half-assed about it? And not many people would come back with a decent enough argument to change my mind. And so it'd be self-propelling, right? But for me, when it came back to enjoying the moment and being present, perfectionism melts away.
Yeah.
And
100%. Because you
and
have a
that's
connection to self in that moment. Self only exists in the here and now. Everything else is an identification of a memory. It's a mental fabrication of self. That's so powerful. And so when you
yeah.
think about what has that cost you, what has that cost you in terms of, and this was something that really landed for me. Now, something that our listeners are going to learn is that this journey means that we have to be willing to look at some hard truths. And sometimes these realizations and sometimes these revelations about ourselves are hard to hear and they're hard to realize. But embrace that, because if you're willing to look, if you're willing to see it, and then not only willing to see it, but actively commit to changing it, everything changes. And so for me, when I was thinking, okay, well, when it comes to perfectionism, what does it cost me if I am striving for perfectionism in a maladaptive, unhealthy way? My kids pay the price because their mum's not around, because I'm sitting in the corner frantically trying to get something perfect. So it takes me away from my family. It costs me time, and there's a money financial cost to that time. So if I'm taking 3 hours to do something that could have been 98% done in 1 hour, what's the 2-hour time cost? If I charge my time out at X dollars per hour, there's a time cost and financial cost of that time, of that lack of productivity. There are so many things that it costs me. It costs me my peace. It costs me my sense of fulfillment, and it costs me my ability to just enjoy the process of what I'm creating. And all of that for that suffocating feeling that unless it's perfect, I'm not good enough. Unless it's perfect, I'm not worthy. Unless it's perfect, unless I am perfect. That is just, it's not enough. And so then when I look at what that teaches my kids, do you know a lot of perfectionism is taught through role modeling? If I am being a perfectionist and requiring perfection from my kids, I'm teaching them to grow up with perfectionism. I'm role modeling it. And so perfectionism can come from children developing it themselves because of like high parental expectations, or their parents being very critical of them, or trauma. Perfectionism can be a coping mechanism for trauma, but we won't go into that at the moment. But actually, the main way that we learn perfectionism is growing up with people who teach us perfectionism. Like family, they normalize those behaviors. They make it seem like that's what's important. It's a value proposition.
Mm.
Do you know
So
how I
what?
taught my daughter to not be a perfectionist?
Oh, do
I
tell.
would sit down and I would color with her, and I would intentionally and purposely color out of the lines, and Mummy made a mistake. And you know what she'd say to me? It's
What's
okay,
that?
Mummy. It's okay to make mistakes. You don't have to be perfect.
You know,
She was like
part
4 years old.
part of me cringed a little bit when you said that you were colouring in and you went outside the lines. There's a little bit left in there for me.
Yeah. But
But I
there are
guess,
things, there are things that can come up. If I'm watching my son vacuum, for instance, that's one that I'm just like, how can you not see it? But it'll come up in various aspects of life.
so when we're talking about perfectionism, there's like if we look at it as like an axis or a scale, and at one end you've got unmotivated, half-assed, doesn't get anything done. On the other end, you've got crippling perfectionism. But then you want to get into that bit where it's sort of like you've got high standards. You've
I
got
love this
pride.
question. I love it. Because one is an axis of function, one is an axis of dysfunction. Just like someone who is unmotivated, lazing on the couch, binge watching Netflix, going nowhere with their life, that is
They don't
on
suffer
the
from perfectionism.
that is on the axis of dysfunction. The other end of the axis of dysfunction is perfectionism that's maladaptive, that's highly critical, that all the things we've been talking about. But then you've got the axis of function. And the axis of function on one end is someone who can feel safe resting, stopping, being still, being present. And on the other end of the axis in terms of productivity is really executing to a high standard, and this is what I would call adaptive perfectionism, which is just effectively having high standards, striving for excellence. But there's also, because we are on a functional axis, there's self-compassion, there's flexibility, there's resilience in the face of like setbacks or mistakes. It's safe to make mistakes because we learn from them, as opposed to the maladaptive, dysfunctional axis where it's not safe to do anything because if you do it, you're bad, you're wrong, you're not good enough.
Okay,
So there's two different, completely different. One is regulated, one is dysregulated.
Okay, so when we're looking at what does a regulated look like? Let's focus on that. So it's sort of like I think we've both mentioned compassion. It's sort of like if it's not right, it's okay. But if you want to be better and you want to learn something more because you are driven and you're wanting to, grow and evolve, these are all healthy things to be able to do it. Yeah. When it tips over into perfectionism, is it what we're kind of saying, maybe what you're saying is that at that point it is, it all just comes back to it's driven by fear.
Absolutely, 100%. So regulation is love, dysregulation is fear.
Okay, so in a sense, when you can look at it, and because some people might sort of say, I'll fix my fear of perfectionism and do everything half-assed. Well, yeah, you're not wrong. You're gonna do that, but that's not a healthy way.
No,
to
that's not the answer,
it.
because doing everything half-assed is staying on the axis of dysregulation. So remember, I think I said, I don't know if it was at the start of this episode or last episode, we've spoken about it recently anyway, where I spoke about how it's not about the outcome, it's about how you feel. Is it fear or love? And this is a perfect example, because by saying, I'm going to overcome perfectionism by just half-assing everything, that's actually still executing. The half-assedness is coming from a place of fear. You're still on the fear spectrum. But imagine it's not about the outcome. Imagine if the outcome still remained amazing attention to detail, amazing, outputs and all those kinds of things, except it was from a place of love and not fear. So striving for excellence, having high attention to detail, persistence with things, having a constant value of self-improvement, having strong personal values. All of these things are really important because they come from a place of love. And so it's not about the outcome. It's about how you feel if you can't achieve that outcome. So if you can't achieve, if you do make a mistake, is there love to catch that? Or is there fear to condemn it or criticize it?
And I think you'll know the difference because the fear puts you back into the loop of keep on going, keep on going, keep on going,
You
keep on
know the
going, keep on
difference
going.
because of how you feel.
Mm.
If you feel safe, if you feel in your body, oh, I made a mistake. Like my daughter, the example I just gave, her response to that was, it's okay, mummy.
Mm.
Not, oh, what did you do? You idiot.
The whole thing's ruined.
Yeah, exactly. And so you can feel the reaction, that immediate innate reaction that comes up, that will tell you if you're on the fear spectrum or the love spectrum.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
And
I'm not for a
so,
second saying that perfectionism is all bad, because
mm,
having healthy perfectionism is all of those qualities that I just mentioned.
mm,
Perfectionism in that dysfunctional spectrum axis is the things like, that's the negative consequences. It's anxiety, it's stress, it's dissatisfaction, it's fear. But perfectionism on that functional axis, that healthy axis, is striving for excellence, which is very motivating for people,
mm,
having attention to detail, having persistence, like being able to persevere when there's been setbacks and challenges instead of that defeatism, having really strong personal values like compassion, integrity, love, honesty, those kinds of things, and the self-improvement thing. So one of
mm.
my favorite sayings is, we either win or we learn. That's it. There is no
Love it.
failure. We win or we learn.
Yeah. So something just sort of dropped into me. It's sort of like, because again, I'm sort of struggling to just get this sort of perfect articulate because, there's still some tendencies for me to really want to be
The irony of
perfectly
you wanting this
nail.
perfect articulate thing.
Is it sort of like you can like be proud in what you do, but it doesn't always have to be perfect. Like the attachment to the
Yeah.
outcome, if the
Yeah.
attachment to the outcome is so great,
Yes.
that's what is going to drive that perfection. That's what's going to drive that sort of fear because it's sort of like it's going to be okay. But if you know
Yeah.
you're doing your best and it's okay to drive yourself, to be proud of the work that you've done,
Yeah.
that's quite okay. That's very different to what we're talking about.
Absolutely. But
But it's that,
it's what if it's not? The next question to ask is, it's okay for this to drive me and motivate me to want to produce my best work,
mm,
but what happens when it's not? Do I
yeah,
still feel safe? Do I still feel worthy? Do I still know that I'm a good person, even
mm,
if this wasn't my best? Or even if this
and
wasn't what I'm
yeah,
capable of. And this was a big learning I went through in my academic career, because I experienced burnout in a
mm,
pretty significant way. And this really came to a head for me because what I was capable of before and then what I was capable of after were very different things. And it took a real massaging of the expectations that I had on myself, and actually some incredible mentors. I had some really, really amazing mentors who helped me to journey through that, because they helped me see that my worth wasn't determined by my output. That even if the best output that I could produce when I was experiencing that burnout was 40% of my normal capability, that's still the best that in that moment I could have done. And it didn't make me any less worthy. It didn't make me any less of a human. It didn't make
mm,
me any less valuable. But previously, when I was still harboring this mass fear of letting people down, this mass fear of not being good enough, or mass fear of judgment, or needing the validation through what I was achieving to feel worthy as a human being, that was suffocating.
wow. So what you're really touching on is that perfectionism essentially at the root of it is expectations. And these
Yeah.
expectations can, again, generated by yourself. And then you got to then look at it. Are these realistic or unrealistic expectations? Because like you just sort of said, unrealistic expectations that are really, really high, that you're constantly striving for, that you might not be able to achieve, led to burnout. But then when you went through that burnout and the expectations came down and you're still giving 100% of what you were able to give, that was still okay because, you know, the expectations were readjusted. So
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of like, okay, if we had to look at if we had to summarize in a couple of words, what is it that sort of takes you from being driven and proud and having high standards into perfectionism? It's kind of like understand where you're setting your expectations,
Mm-hmm.
be compassionate, celebrate your wins,
Yeah.
and you can be proud without being fully attached to the outcome.
Absolutely.
How's that sound?
Absolutely. And
Did I
yeah,
did I
massive.
nail it? Was it perfect?
Yeah, you nailed it. It was awesome. Something that came to me as you were speaking just then was one of the hardest things for a perfectionist to ever go through is the birth of a child.
Mm.
And that journey of being a very high achiever, a great executor to a high standard, and being and having the personal resources even like energy, even like time, even like all of these things to be able to invest in achieving those outcomes, and then all of a sudden everything is ripped away from you. Your physical
Mm.
sense of self is ripped away from you. You now have a dependent that relies on you even for their life to be sustained. And if you're breastfeeding, that is even harder because, um, if you're bottle feeding a child, then you've got a partner who can step in and help and can carry some of that load and some of that burden. But that's like the perfect example of having a capacity. So before pre-burnout, my capacity was, let's say, 100%, and then post-burnout, my capacity and therefore my output was 40%. If my
Mm.
worth as a human being is tied to my output, then that burnout's a really dangerous thing for me to experience. Now take that same with motherhood. When before I had kids, my time was mine, my energy was mine, my effort was mine. It was all dependent on factors I could control. Like, I need to go to bed earlier tonight. I'm going to eat some
Mm.
healthier food. I'm going to make this choice about how I spend my time. Cut to now I've just had this baby. My body isn't mine. My sleep isn't mine. My time
Mm.
isn't mine. This child needs me 24/7, but my worth is still tied to my output. And my worth is still tied,
This is your career output that
yeah,
you're talking
career
about. Yeah.
output, even Dave, even in the home. Like before, I could do my job and have a clean house and cook homemade meals and dress myself nicely and do my hair and all the stuff. I could do it all.
Wow.
But now my
Mm.
capacity is lower and my worth was tied to being able to get it all done, to being able to have a nice, tidy home and a nice home cooked meal on the table by the time my husband came home from work. And all,
Mm.
a fit body because I was training every day and all this stuff. My worth was tied to these things, looking perfect, being perfect, having the perfect home, cooking the perfect meal. If I overcooked something, I would be distraught. Like I would feel like such a failure.
Wow.
And that is just, it's so profound. And I don't think it's well understood in the mental health community, in, even midwives or maternal child health nurses. I don't think that there's enough focus on maternal health in understanding where their sense of worth came from before having children, because the biggest way to send someone into a crisis is to try and tell them, oh, it's okay. Just sleep when the baby sleeps and just, rest when. What a load of crap. That is not going to be helpful to that new mum, because every aspect, every cell of her body will be screaming, you are so tired, but you have to cook dinner. You are so tired, but you've got to clean the house. You are so tired, but you've got to get back to work by the time that baby's 12 weeks old. And it's going against every instinct in your entire body. That is the ultimate thing. And I don't think anyone can, unless you've experienced it, I don't think anyone can understand the significance of that. And it's different for dads in the sense that they have had some level of autonomy and control because they haven't had to give up their body. If they're breastfeeding, they haven't had to do that. The baby's survival isn't dependent on them. So if any mums are listening, just know that I see you, I hear you, I feel what you may be feeling, and I'm with you in that, because it is a really, really, really big, hard journey. And the number one thing that I can encourage anyone to do who can relate to that is to heal the trauma that gave them the perfectionism in the first place.
So powerful, Ash. That was amazing. Like,
Thank
I
you for
felt
giving
it.
me the space.
Not a problem at all. Not a problem at all. It's a very big, powerful thing, and I think it comes back to expectations and the adjustment
Yeah.
of the expectations. And again, as you're sort of saying, when you set expectations that you were able to achieve in a certain lifestyle, and then the lifestyle changes for whatever reason, and the expectation doesn't change because, well, as far as I'm concerned, I've done it before. I can still do it again.
Mhm.
That getting shattered is number one. Number two, if you're a perfectionist and you really sort of, if you had a hard time maintaining it before, and then it's just gone up another level, it's going to be even worse with the change in lifestyle.
Yeah.
That's sort of massive. And being a dad, I can absolutely see from a dad's point of view how it changes. Massive respect to all the mums out there and the wives out there that have gone through that. And but I guess it's about compassion, looking at why it is you might feel that way. And look, I love there's a magnet that I've seen at like news agencies and sort of stuff that sort of says, it's almost like, we'll call it an affirmation, right? They're sort of like, I might have messy flaws, but I have happy kids. And I think
Mm,
that's really important, because if you're striving as a mum to be that perfection, what are the little kids picking up?
yeah.
It's that constant energy of, I've got to be doing, got to be doing, got to be doing, got to be doing, got to be
Yeah.
doing. And
Yeah.
the kids will soak that up. And
Totally.
so colour
And
outside the
not
lines like Ash does.
Yeah, and not only that, I think when so kids feed off our energy, and so when our energy is that self-loathing, I work with so many parents who have or so many parents who might have teen children or even adult children who are struggling in their own sense of self-worth and self-efficacy and self-esteem and all those kinds of things. And then when we talk about how they were feeling as a parent when their children were young, it was all the pressures that they were under. They were feeling like they weren't good enough. They were feeling like they were failing. They were feeling like they were letting everyone down and dropping all the balls and all that kind of stuff. And so, energetically, how do we show up when we're feeling that way? We
Mm.
might say the right things, we might do all the things, but actually, children, their language, what they're hearing and picking up has nothing to do with what we say. It's got to do with our energy when we say it. It's
Mm.
like someone going, "Hey, how you going?" And they go, "Yeah, good." You're gonna go, "Are you really?"
Yeah.
there's like there's a conflict here between what you're
Yeah.
saying and what I'm receiving energetically. And so our kids develop and build their own sense of self and their nervous system based upon the energy in which we conduct ourselves. And if there has been remember, perfectionism is highly self-critical. We have
Mm.
literally taught our kids to be highly self-critical through the way that we have been critical of ourselves, but we would never, ever, ever be critical directly of them. I mean, some people are, absolutely, but if we are highly conscious and loving parents, generally we are not directly critical of our kids to our kids, and yet we teach them to be critical of ourselves by the way we treat ourselves. And that has just given me a great idea for our next episode. How do you feel about talking about self-care?
Love it. Because I think what we've done is, if we go back to the earlier episodes, we've started with who are we, the sense of self, and then some of the things. Like I think we've covered like the major ones, like people pleasing, fear of rejection, perfectionism. So like how these things kind of manifest when these wounds are here. So let's start diving into a bit of the self care. I think it's going to be brilliant.
Awesome.
Okay,
Amazing. So
brilliant.
self-care, tune in for the next. Is there anything else you want to say to wrap this up?
Oh no, look, I think it's been a big episode. Loved it. I love the shares. It's I can still see there's a few things I still need to work on the old perfectionism side. But as Ash says, we're all a work in progress.
Yeah.
And so love it. I look forward to catching you on the next video.
Awesome. And guys, if this has brought anything up for you, if you've got questions, if you're identifying things within yourself that you want feedback on or you want perspective on, join us on our socials, connect with us, comment on the show comments, connect with us in a way that allows us to help you and to speak life into your life, speak love into your life, to shine a light on those shadows of darkness, because that's what we're here for. We really hope that this is making a difference for you, and can't wait to have you back for the next episode where we will talk all things self-care.
Beautifully said, Ash.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.